Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Today I want to tell you what happened when I did transition pictures for Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife. She was executed in the year 1536 in the Tower of London and was beheaded for treason, adultery, incest, and a bunch of other trumped-up charges. As well as that, though, I thought it would be really interesting to see if I could do a little time-traveling trick and go back to the 16th century. You know, right now we're fixed in linear time. We're in the 3D world, and so we can't time travel, but in the 5-dimensional world, we can, because it's non-linear, it's timeless, and so you're able to move backwards and forwards. I mean, that's what this feels like. So I'll tell you those pictures, really, really interesting, quite gripping actually, but also the transition for Anne Boleyn. She was an extremely smart and politically savvy and highly opinionated woman with an extravagant taste in clothes and decor and homes and so on. She started out as the maid of honour to Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, although apparently it wasn't very long before he turned his wandering eye to Anne herself. She, being a strong woman, said, "No, I'm not getting involved, not unless you marry me, not unless I am queen." At which point, Henry began plotting how to get his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled. Went to the Pope. The Pope said, "No, I'm not annulling it." Undaunted, Henry decided to sideline the Catholic Church and dissolve the monasteries in Britain. And he made the Church of England the main religion of the country, and the new Archbishop said, "Okay, I'll annul your marriage," and that's what happened. And Anne, still in her 20s by this point, I believe, became the Queen Consort of England, stayed as the Queen Consort for the next 3 years until her death, and gave Henry his daughter, who later grew up to be Queen Elizabeth I. Unfortunately, Henry didn't really want a daughter. He wanted a son and heir. And no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't produce a son. So, in typical fashion, Henry's gaze wandered on to somebody else, Jane Seymour, and he had to figure out a way to get rid of his queen consort. So, as far as historians go, there were trumped-up charges against her. Adultery, treason, incest. He even said, this is Henry, he even said that she had used some form of witchcraft to lure him in, to woo him into marrying her, none of which was true, of course. But Anne was arrested, she was put on trial, and she was convicted, and she was beheaded. Now, we know from past transitions I've done for people who've been executed that this is not a natural thing to happen to a human soul. It feels like an offence against the universe. And it's not the criminal, it's actually the executioner who pays the karmic price for this, as far as I can tell. Anne, according to historians, took it really, really well. Said, "Okay, this is my fate, the law has adjudicated, and I accept that this is how it's all going to go." She made speeches, she wrote letters. "May God have mercy on my soul." And then she was blindfolded and killed and beheaded. But this idea that she was calm and elegant and took it in her stride is not what happened in the pictures. When I did her energy. There she is. And as I watched, somebody came up behind her, grabbed her by surprise, so none of this was expected, grabbed her by surprise and carried her off, struggling and kicking and yelling and screaming. She threw an ongoing tantrum as the law, I assume the figure behind her represents the law, as the law took its course. She was put through a series of portals, I suppose, little holes in the wall that were steadily decreasing in size. I assume this is the trial, the lead up to her death. And the options became narrower and narrower and narrower. And at the end, I could see the entrance to that cave that I always see that represents the transition point between life on this side in form and life on the other side in formlessness. So she knew that this was a foregone conclusion. She could see it through all the little holes. It was right at the end there. And somewhat resigned to this, I guess. Therefore, she went through these tighter and tighter apertures in the wall as the trial wound down and she realized what her fate was going to be and went into the tunnel. And from then on, it felt like suspended animation, like a bug caught in amber. No sense of going anywhere, just drifting. Life, as she'd known it, simply ended. And because it was so traumatic, her soul didn't know where she was going. Her consciousness was simply turning over as if it was in space. She was gone, but she had no idea where. Eventually, though, that cave that I always see, it always happens in these transitions. It's not real, it's metaphorical, but it gives me some kind of symbolic idea of what people go through. That cave came into view now that the trauma was done, now that her consciousness was regaining some kind of equilibrium. She could see where she was heading. It was all coming into perspective. And she went through and had a pretty rough landing. Because the energy she'd had, and again, this idea that she was demure and relaxed and noble and elegant is a complete fabrication as far as the pictures go, because she had so much pent-up energy that when she hit the ground, which she did very, very roughly, sort of throwing soil up, metaphorical soil up, she began spinning around on the ground. Furious. All that pent-up rage that she had maybe pressed down inside herself so that she could appear like a queen, so that she could appear like she didn't care very much. All that came out now, but expressed in this spinning, frantic, propeller-like motion around and around and around, until that deep, deep reservoir of emotion had been drained. And she knew it was over. She knew she was dead. Now, before I continue the rest of the way, because that's interesting too, but before I do, I want to tell you what happened when I attempted another of our little time travel experiments. I thought, can I go back to the year 1536, which is when she was executed, and get a feel for that period? I had no idea what would happen. I just thought, let's try. It can't hurt. Now, these drawings are a little rough, because they were so complicated, but it's so fascinating as well. And when I went into that energy, I was in a darkened bedroom. There was a bed over here. There were no lights, of course, no light switches or anything like that. But there was a bed over here, and there was somebody in the bed. Apparently, my plan was to get out of the room. But as I walked along, everything creaked. I remember feeling like, oh no, they're going to wake up. Oh no, oh no. I had that sense of inner palpitations of panic. I got to get out of here before they wake up. Then I opened the door, like a big door. I think it was maybe one of a pair, perhaps, like two doors. But I opened the door, and that creaked too. It was like, I really felt my nerves frazzled as I was creeping around. And when I got outside, there was light coming in through a window and a corridor that split. It went this way or that way. There was like a right angle. And I looked down one side. It was very long. And if there was anybody around, I wouldn't be able to get very far. So I chose the shorter corridor. And I get a sense that there were people moving, but I couldn't see them and I couldn't really hear them. There was just a sense that within this larger space of a house, I assume, there were people moving. And I went down the corridor and felt, oh, there is somebody just around this next corner, and there was a curtain. I went behind the curtain. It was like a heavy, velvety curtain type thing. I went behind the curtain, and there was a doorway there. And if anybody was coming, then that was my escape. It was like a set of back stairs. I crept down, and at the bottom, there was a light and movement. Somebody was moving around. I peered around the door. This all sounds very melodramatic, but I was kind of panicky, actually. I was kind of worried that I was going to be found. So I looked around the door, and there is somebody in a room just across the way here doing something. It must be early morning, like 3 or something like that, 4 o'clock in the morning. But somebody was doing something for the household or preparing for something. And I waited until they were around the doorway out of sight, and I crept by. And there were corridors off to my right with doors in, so there were people in there probably as well. But I crept on by there and went outside. I made it to the exterior of this building without being seen. And found myself in the grounds of a big house that towered above me. Very dark. It was so isolated. There was no noise. This is the thing about this, is there's no ambient noise like we take for granted in our time. It was quiet and it was isolated. Nobody was moving. Nothing was moving. And I just stood there. I'm not quite sure what happened after that, but I do know that if I just stayed as me in that environment until daylight, I could then see the house, and I could also hear, what would you call it, like wheels and horses and stuff approaching. There was a path in front of me, and a vehicle went by, not a carriage, because it's long before they would have carriages. Apparently, people like Henry VIII, if he wanted to go somewhere, had to get on a horse and go, physically go. There was nobody really to take him. And so this was unusual in that there was some kind of vehicle, like a cart, that was covered. And there was somebody in the cart. This person, I sense, was very formal. They were carrying something, and as they got off the cart, they got their foot caught in something of the cart and almost fell to the ground. Recovered at the last second, kind of dusted themselves off, and then went to the house. And then I just was inside the house with them, and there was some kind of kerfuffle, like this person was unexpected. They had that thing that they were carrying. It wouldn't be an envelope probably, but whatever it was, they were carrying this thing. And suddenly somebody appeared from out of a doorway who'd been put forward as some kind of spokesperson, I think. And the official gentleman who'd arrived wanted to speak to the master or the mistress of the house, and was told no by this other person, I will take responsibility for this. And the document, I guess it was, or something, whatever it was handed over to them. And that was all I got. But it was so real. I was so frightened. I thought I might have a coronary. If the slightest unexpected thing happened, if somebody jumped out at me or something, I would have just had a coronary on the spot. Absolutely mind-blowing. I have no idea if the person in the bed was indeed Anne Boleyn. It's a bit of a stretch, but it was somebody who was sleeping in the bed, and this official gentleman with a missive of some kind of communication, arrived to give that person some kind of message. More than that, I do not know. But anyway, back to the transition pictures. Anne had done her expenditure of energy propeller thing on the metaphorical ground. She was a fighter, because when she stood up in the pictures, she had her fist balled, and it was like, right, let's get this over with. There had been an injustice done on her soul. She knew this. There was nothing she could do to make it right, but she knew that something was very, very wrong here. And she marched off up the tunnel. Interestingly, the tunnel had two sides. I've seen this before where there's a set of steps up one side, and you can, if you want to, climb up the steps. It's a lot of effort, but you can go for it. Or, if you want an easier time and you're willing to let go of some of the ego issues that are still linking you to your life in form, if you're willing to let go of those, there's a path up the side, which is easier to climb. It was all uphill, though. There was a lot for her to let go of. By the time she reached the cave at the top, the one with the light in that I always see, that marks the place of ascension for people, she was on her knees, defeated. Her spirit had been crushed. Now, her soul's fine. The soul continues. And grace is still welcoming. All is well. But she had trouble letting go of the injustice. Look how far she got in life. Look how high she'd risen. Only to be toppled by some story, most of which probably wasn't true. But the point is, she knew which bits were true and which weren't, and she felt that she had been the subject of a grave wrong that she was unable to correct. And that really troubled her, even to this late stage. But she fell to the ground and gradually realized that resisting this process at this stage was absolutely pointless. The forces of the universe were pulling her forward. And in the end, she just kind of went limp. It's like, oh, God, all right, okay. And rolled like a tumbleweed into the dome of light. She'd fought and fought and fought and fought and fought, been angry, and it's like, well, whatever. At the very last minute, whatever. And into the light she tumbled. So absolutely fascinating. It confirms what we already know about executions, that they shouldn't happen because they interrupt the flow of the soul's path. No matter what the person did in life, I don't think a human being has the right to, and I'm just talking in terms of spirituality here, not in terms of right or wrong on the mortal level. A human being doesn't have the right to take the life of another one as punishment, it seems. Because it leaves the soul of the victim, often the criminal, but the soul of the victim perturbed, disrupted, and so troubled that it makes the transition a lot harder than it otherwise needed to be. She went into the light feeling like a victim. And at some point, I guess, at some higher dimensional level, that has to be ironed out. That wrinkle has to be ironed out. I don't know how. It's not part of my remit to know that, but absolutely fascinating. And that's what I learned from Anne Boleyn. Thanks for watching, guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.